wetting while you're asleep, wetting while you're awake, so daytime wetting, daytime frequency or urgency, sometimes pain while urinating, urinary tract infections in girls especially because they're more prone, um, kidney refluxes. So all those are related. All of them, all those conditions, and poop accidents or encopresis, all those get better if you empty the rectum.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Toilet issues, such as bedwetting or accidents or constipation, are not uncommon in kids. But despite this, there is a growing body of evidence that these conditions are often misunderstood or even mistreated. My guest today, Dr. Steve Hodges, is a professor of pediatric urology at Wake Forest University School of Medicine. He's a leading authority on childhood toileting, and his work is debunking many of the myths about it. If a kid in your life has toilet issues, you will want to pay close attention. This podcast was sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
A lot of what we learn in medical school is, book learning, and then a lot of it is the resident or the attending you work with just told you this is the way it is. And so I remember being a resident in our kind of our Medicaid or Medicare clinic or a residence clinic, or for those without insurance, and because we kind of ran it ourselves back then, and our chief resident saying, "Oh, here's a bedwetting kid. We usually don't treat them till they're 6, and then you can give them these medicines." I'm like, okay, and we do that, and I kind of put that away as like this is something that you just don't treat until they're older, and then you give them medicines. And then really didn't learn much about it. And then when I got back to after residency, after fellowship, started my own practice, I would see, about half my practice is avoiding dysfunction related problems. I would see these kids, and I would do the cookbook treatment that is recommended in our guidebooks and textbooks and so forth, which is some laxatives, some time voiding, maybe some medicines, and I honestly was seeing them back maybe more often than most people would. I would see them back, you kind of just make it up, right? Like I'll see you in 3 months, see how you're doing. And I
Right.
saw a significant lack of progress. Like I was doing everything the textbook said and no one was getting better. And I was like, it becomes embarrassing, right? Where you're like, here, do this. And they come back and they're no better. And you're like, well, what are you going to say? And
Right.
I don't want to, you know, malign anyone, but I do think maybe some people see them less often or just assume that they're hard to treat and say, well, you just haven't been doing it long enough, come back in a year or 2 years. And so that was in my brain that, man, these kids are not getting better. This is weird. And then I had a girl that was having kidney reflux, which is a condition that makes you more prone to get UTIs. And
Mm-hmm.
and those UTIs or urinary tract infections have high fever, and a major risk factor for that is constipation. And so I remember I treated her aggressively like I do everyone, and her parents were great parents, very involved. I believe that they were doing all the stuff that we need to do. She ended up needing surgery because her reflux did not resolve. And when I did the surgery, her bladder was so kind of pushed out of the way from poop in the end of her colon that I was made the surgery difficult. And I was like, geez, that was hard. And I remember going to talk to the family afterwards. I said, have you guys been doing like the laxatives? They go, yeah, every day. She's pooping fine. I'm like, well, that is so weird because
Mm.
that's not what I saw in there. And as fate would have it, the next week I went to a course for congenital cloacal anomalies in Cincinnati. I remember specifically, I was very sick that weekend. And so I went to that course. And one of the things I picked up from that course, amongst other things, was that they do X-rays on everyone when they're managing their bowel status, because they're for various reasons they need these kids to be empty, completely empty. So
Right.
they'll give them a bowel program and they'll give them an X-ray, and then if they're not empty, they give them another bowel program. And so I said, when I get home, I'm gonna X-ray all these kids because something's up.
Right.
And I remember the first kid I came in, he says, "I'm bedwetter. You poop every day?" "Yeah, poop's fine." "Okay, let's just get an X-ray." Got an X-ray, just completely full of poop. And I was like, just light bulb went off. Like, this is it. This is the whole thing. Like, we thought we were getting these kids empty, and we weren't. I'm gonna win a Nobel Prize. I'm gonna retire next year. And so I started doing that. Got all this data together. Got one of my junior residents that wanted to do peds. I said, "Hey, we got to write this up. This is amazing. Go put all this stuff together. Write it up." She goes home, starts looking at the data, and she calls me up. She goes, "Dude, someone like wrote about this in the '80s. This is not new." I'm like,
Right.
"Really?" And so there was a guy, a nephrologist from Canada, not a urologist, nephrologist, wrote about this in the '80s. His name was Sean O'Regan. He was no longer practicing. He was in Arizona at the time. He'd gone from Montreal to Arizona. And you're probably around probably a little younger than me, but same era. Remember the movie War Games? Matthew
Yeah.
Broderick. Yeah. Remember when he was looking for Stephen Falking, whatever the
Right.
guy that I was like on that tour. I was like, I gotta find Sean Regan. I'm like trying to find him, trying to find him. I finally find this number online. I call it, and I never forget. I'm on the road, and Sean Regan answers. I'm like, "Dr. Regan?" He goes, "Yeah." "Oh my God, this I can't believe this. People don't treat constipation." He goes, "Yes, Steve." I can't do an Irish accent, but he's like, "It's not constipation. It's incomplete rectal emptying. You're on the right track." I'm like, "Oh, this is awesome." And that's how it started. And so
Wow.
I found that if you get these kids empty, these problems get better. And then my journey since that time has been finding better and more effective ways to get these kids empty, because it's not as easy as it might sound.
And actually, so the name of your book is called it's named after O'Brien, right?
Correct, correct,
So
correct. Regan, yeah. So it was my
O'Regan.
first book was It's No Accent. That was like before we even knew all this stuff. It was like first when I first found out that this is the cause, I wanted to get it on paper right away, so we wrote It's No Accent. And then the the new books have been since then called the MOP books, which mean Modified O'Regan Protocol. Because O'Regan, I mean, he's a genius, and the fact that he discovered this is, I can't overstate that. But he saw a smaller population of kids than I've seen now because
Right.
he only practiced for a short time, and so he was getting everyone dry in a month. So the O'Regan protocol was an enema every night for a month, and then you would taper over 2 months. And it works, but sometimes we have to do more than a month. So that's why we modified it, and that's why our protocol is called the Modified O'Regan Protocol, which is kind of catchy as MOP or MOP.
So just to back up here, because we've started off talking about bedwetting, and I think that a lot of my listeners are going to be familiar with that. And I want to come back to bedwetting because you in your book said something really interesting about it. But we're not just talking about addressing bedwetting, are we? There are several conditions that you believe are being incorrectly diagnosed and definitely incorrectly treated.
Yeah, and that's a big hurdle we've tried to overcome is that I would say the majority of physicians see bedwetting as a distinct entity,
Right.
um, unrelated to the global, what people may call dysfunctional elimination or bowel and bladder dysfunction. But what we've seen is if you take all of bowel and bladder dysfunction in kids, otherwise healthy kids, so we say, they don't have a spinal cord anomaly or other kind of anatomic problems, then wetting while you're asleep, wetting while you're awake, so daytime wetting, daytime frequency or urgency, sometimes pain while urinating, urinary tract infections in girls especially because they're more prone,
Hmm.
um, kidney refluxes. So all those are related. All of them, all those conditions, and poop accidents or encopresis,
Right.
all those get better if you empty the rectum or empty the bowels, and they get better in a distinct order. So most kids, not everybody, but the vast majority, as you get more constipated, which I know is probably a wrong term for that, but as your rectum gets more dilated, the first thing to show up will be bedwetting, and that's why people think it's normal because it's present in so many kids. Because
Right.
very minimal dilation in susceptible populations will cause it. And then as you get more distended, you'll get daytime symptoms like frequency and urgency. You'll get daytime wetting that you feel or don't even feel sometimes. And you'll have just poop falling out in the underwear that the kids don't notice called
Right.
encopresis. And since you lose the sensation with this problem for various reasons, kids get blamed for it often because parents are like, "What are you doing? How do you not know you pooped on yourself?" But the kids do not know because of the way the pathology develops.
And one of the things that you said in your book that I thought was interesting because you provide this chart of what percentage of kids at which ages have bedwetting issues, what you'd expect. But you point out that even though bedwetting might be common or expected, it's not normal in the sense that it it's still an indication that something might be wrong physically with the person. Am I stating that
100%.
correctly?
Yes, you're 100% right. And I like, every time I say something, I got to be careful because some people take it to an extreme, but I agree that bedwetting is not normal in humans. Now, I hedge that by saying, if you have a 3-year-old in a crib that doesn't, can't get out of the crib and scare the dark, they're probably going to pee in a pull up.
Right.
But Dr. Regan, discovered this by treating his own son first. And that's what prompted him to do the research. And his son was 4 years old. And so, if you're able to be continent during the day and you can sleep in a bed and and you can go to the bathroom if you need to, wetting while unconscious in a kid that's, let's say, 4 is a hard, just because
Mhm.
it gets fishy, too much younger than that, is definitely a sign of overactive bladder and most likely constipation. I think we do a disservice to children by not treating it because sure, they may outgrow it, and we could talk about why that is if you want, but they may not, and it may be decades later, and that's a lot of loss of quality of life and stress for the family for those years.
And so if your child is having trouble with nighttime wetting or accidents during the day, or poop problems, pooping when they're not supposed to, or I guess that's not the right way to talk about it, but you even talk about skid marks.
Mhm.
You talk about releasing the bowels and not being aware of it. And the scenarios that you present in the book are, kids that have voided in the middle of class and caused a great
Mhm.
amount of embarrassment there. And your first step is to, if I'm not mistaken, is to say, well, take an x-ray. If there's a lot of poop backed up inside, then this is what's causing it. Is there any harm in giving a child an x-ray for this?
So, you know what? Honestly, I do the X-rays a lot for the parents these days, just because I could tell you what it's going to show if I see these
Okay.
kids 'cause I've done enough.
Right.
But it is valuable as a marker of progress sometimes to see where they are at
Right.
the beginning. Um, and I could give my whole spiel to a mom, and it just doesn't. I don't blame them. It doesn't make sense a lot of times that a child that comes in there that has never had a problem pooping in their entire life, as far as they know, all they do is wet the bed. They're a very deep sleeper.
Right.
What does poop have to do with it? And so, X-ray helps me kind of make the case that this is what's going on. But to your point, um, X-rays are very safe if used for the right purposes. We get
Okay.
dental X-rays and so forth. I remember one of my old professors said it's the same amount of radiation as living for a year or driving or flying to Denver. That's what he told me. So, it's just something that, I don't do x-rays willy-nilly, but I do think they're very helpful in figuring out what's going in these kids and measuring progress if you need to. And I do often, 'cause a lot of people use medicines for bedwetting, and I will use medicines if I'm trying to get kids drier faster, but
Mhm.
I don't use them if they're really full of poop because I know they won't work. So it's another use of x-rays to see if medicines are indicated or not.
Yeah, I mentioned that x-ray only because I like my listeners are all not all of them are going to be able to come to you,
Hmm.
and they might have to end up advocating for their kid or helping a parent of a child in their class advocate for a different approach. And so it seems to me this is a no-brainer. If the x-ray shows that there's the dried up hardened poop inside them, that there needs to be a different course of action than wait for it, or it's psychological, or it's attention seeking, or all these other things that people blame it on.
Yeah, and it's funny. I wish it were that easy, and I don't mean to come across as someone that's making excuses for this stuff, but the if you get an X-ray in these kids, I know what to look for, and I can show you what to look for. But a lot of times, radiologists, they're just reading an X-ray, so they'll say,
Okay.
normal X-ray with moderate stool. which is
Mm,
meaningless. And then you have people that do what I do for a living, see the same kids, and they'll see like X-rays are normal. They're supposed to have poop, and so we've published some data on what the appearance of poop in the X-rays looks like in these kids. It's predominantly accumulated in the rectum and the right colon. Um, but yeah, it's kind of a few steps. You have to get the X-ray, and then you have to have somebody that knows what to look for to read the X-ray, which makes you sound like a kook or quack, but I mean it's real. It's reproducible. Sometimes I'll play. Clinic gets pretty monotonous, so I'll be like, I'm gonna bet you what the X-ray is gonna look like, for fun for the
right,
parents. I draw a picture, and it's always the same. So, and then the other thing we fight too is, okay, if I can convince a family, yeah, your child's full of poop. This is what's causing it. Okay, great. And they do a Miralax clean out or something, do something,
right,
and and they think they're empty. And well, they're not better. I'm like, okay, it's not that easy either. You have to shrink the
right.
colon. So it's I know I'm making a lot of caveats, but I can assure you that if you have a child with a dilated rectum having these accents and you empty them out and shrink the rectum, the problems will go away.
Right.
Happen time and time again. Yeah.
And let's talk about the change in your approach to the treatment. And because you mentioned in your most recent volume that you did change, that you used to be about prescribing laxatives, or that the Miralax treatment, and now you believe that enemas are by far a safer, quicker way to resolve these issues.
Yeah, it's great comment. So in question, the remember when at the beginning I said, half of the stuff we learn, half the stuff you're just told by people, like
Right.
like apprenticeship. And so when I was in my residency, like how do you get kids poop? Yeah, we give them Miralax, okay? And then you say you get some, okay, how do you give Miralax? And they'd say, well, you do 1 cap a day and whatever. And or how you do a clean out? And you get like a little form. It would say how to do a clean out. So when I first started treating this, that's all I would do. And got a lot of people dry. I remember one of my neighbors was like, my kid's wet in the bed. I go, just take some Miralax. And like the next week, they're like, you're a genius. I'm like, oh, thanks. But those are the kids that got empty pretty easily. And then I started running into kids, the more kids I saw that wouldn't get empty with Miralax. And that's around the same time I kind of discovered the Dr. Regan's enema protocol. And I had been told by, again, people I work with, enemas are safe, but only do one a day. So I'm like, okay, that's a good rule of thumb. Let's do one enema a day. And, got a lot of kids drier. Um, but got comfortable using enemas, which a lot of people aren't using enemas chronically. But Dr. Regan helped me with that. And then I found some kids, okay, enemas aren't enough. Maybe some kids need X-Lax. And so I talked to some other doctors. I go, yes, and I never use X-Lax. I had the same fears as everyone else. Oh, it'll cause dependency, blah, blah, blah. Talk to doctor, like, no, we use it all the time. You can use this many. This is how many safe. So, the journey's been like a journey of me being afraid to use something, finding out it's
Right.
okay or the safe way to use it, adapting it. And the most recent, like you mentioned, is, the enemas multiple times a day. We're always trying to get kids as empty as possible, as rapidly as possible. And the more, you know, defecations we can prompt with our therapy, the better during the day. So we have found some enemas that you can use multiple times a day, because the once a day philosophy was based only on the phosphate based enemas, which are a unique composition. So yeah, so every so often, we'll find a paper or someone that's doing some stuff. Had one kid that wouldn't get empty at all. I tried everything, and this old school doctor is recommending we put oil in at night and let the oils dwell over in the rectum,
Yeah.
and then do an enema in the morning. And it's kind of a oil retention enema, and that works. So that we have a bunch of kind of arrows in our quiver now, and we can use them, and we usually are able to find something that works for most kids, but it takes time.
And if the child has an enlarged rectum, it takes several weeks after being emptied for it to return to normal size and to stop putting that extra pressure on the bladder. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a two-phase kind of process. Think one is get empty, two is keep it empty so that it shrinks, and the amount of time it takes to shrink, varies per population. I mean, maybe one day we'll be able to predict that. We had like a we've had a couple theories about maybe kids that are more flexible. We looked for
Mm.
like kids with like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Are they more likely to have this? And really didn't tie in, but something about the composition of how much you're likely to hold, how quickly your rectum stretches when you do hold, and how long it takes to come back to normal. It varies. But and that's where the X-rays can help. Is kind of measure progress.
One of the things I like about your book is that you go through all of the kind of standard explanations for either pooping or urinating problems and debunk them, looking at the research. Why do people say this? And concluding sometimes they were just guessing. You couldn't find any research to support why they blamed bedwetting on X, Y, or Z. Um, but you also get to a place where you talk about the signs of constipation. So these are things to look for in the kids, either in your own house or in your classroom or in your practice, that they might be constipated. Can you lead me through some of those signs?
Yeah, so I think the most consistently predictable sign is large poop size, right? So poop should be 2 centimeters wide, ideally. And so if child's pooping out these huge logs, and I always hear that from parents. Oh, it was adult-sized poops, huge poops, blah blah. And that, think about it for a second, it makes sense. They were kind of putting it off pooping until it piled up at the end of the rectum, and they kind of
Mm.
forced it out. So that's number one. But I just talked to a family that had an infant diagnosed with infant diarrhea. So basically, they were impacted so young that with the rectum was impacted with poop at such a young age that the child had chronic diarrhea because only the poop that could come out would seep around it.
Oh, wow.
And since no one did an X-ray, the poor child was treated for diarrhea for years, dietary changes and so forth, and then developed chronic accents. And then with an X-ray, they were able to discover there was fecal impaction. So I think you want kids to poop regularly. I don't say it has to be every day, but ideally every day. Small and 2 centimeters wide. And you don't want rare poops, you don't want large poops, and you don't want too frequent poops, right? Like if they're pooping multiple times a day, that's a bad sign too. You should get
Okay.
a bolus of poop at the end of the rectum, empty it out, and be done. If you're going with frequency of defecation, that can be a sign of incomplete emptying as well.
Got it. And so when we talk about this treatment, when we talk about enemas, you point out that this is enemas are ancient, that humans have been using this to treat conditions for a very long time, but there seems to be a reluctance in contemporary society to use enemas. What's that about, and how do you get people comfortable with performing enemas?
Yeah, I'm sure in your field too. You see something so often, you become a little desensitized to it. So I'm sure if you went back to 30 years ago, me, and told me about enemas, it would be weird as well. But now that I look at it kind of just analytically, as a physician, like here's the problem. What's the most direct solution? It's obvious. It's like, why would you use anything else? But there is a hang up, for whatever reason, and even very mature adults, professionals that should know better, against putting something in the rectum. And I can make up a lot of reasons or analogies to help explain it. But I often say, I think part of it has to do with the fact that the problem or the medical condition itself isn't considered to be serious or not taken seriously,
Mm,
because most kids outgrow things. Let's say, I had some horrible cancer or something like that. And they said, look, you have horrible cancer, you're probably going to die. And I'm not trying to make light of the situation. I'm saying, and they said, but if you did enemas every day, you'd be cured. It would be no brainer, right? Like
right.
the severity of the condition seemed like it'd be worth it. But for these accidents that a lot of parents think, well, the kid's probably partly to blame anyway, and you know
Mm,
they don't like putting things in their bottom. It's just weirds people out. Um, but if you kind of detach yourself from it a little bit and just look at it as a medical condition that you're trying to solve, then I think it helps. And I think some kids, a small percentage, shockingly, it's just a no go, right? They won't do it. But the
right.
vast majority, once they're doing the enemas and go and are going more easily, they see that they feel better and they're willing to do it. And that you know weirds parents out too. But it's just, you want to get the kid fixed as fast as possible, and that's just, we're offering the best way. And I'm open minded to new ways. We've tried X-Lax and other things too, but the problem is at the end of the colon. The emptying is difficult there, and that's where the enemas are active. So that's why we push them so firmly.
And you recognized early on the value in getting your patients to talk to each other. So you actually have a kind of a closed Facebook group for these families so they can learn from one another. Is that correct?
Yeah, I tell you, that has been really interesting, and that's something that I have certain gifts, I have certain shortcomings, as we all do, and I'm not as organized as I need to be, and I'm not. But what that helped me do is get kind of a real world lab, so to speak, not in a positive way. Where I'll give you an example. So when I first started doing daily enemas, I was just like it's like I said, it's always been a search, like how to get emptier, how to get emptier, how to get
Right.
emptier. And so there's a doctor that deals just with encopresis up in he was in Ohio, now he's in DC, Dr. Levitt, brilliant guy. And they deal with children with imperforate anus. He was actually at that first course in San Diego. I mean, in
Mm.
Cincinnati that I mentioned. So they deal with imperforate anus, cloacal anomalies, these conditions where the children don't have normal anal sphincters. So the way they can get them dry is by doing a really good enema once a day, empty all the poop out, and then they're dry until it fills up again, and but not so
Right.
much they leak and they empty them out again. And I go, well, this guy's got to have the best enemas, right? I'll go figure out how he does these enemas, and I'll just give them to everybody, and we'll be fine. And it was that's what we call Mop Plus, and they're these homemade enemas. You put saline, and you can add glycerin, and they have these boot camps where they get these kids empty, and it works great for poop accidents. But guess what? It made some bedwetters worse
Mm.
because the volume of the enema was so large, it stretched the rectum. So I give them these kids, and they're like, "Well, look, the poop accidents got better, but now we're wetting the bed more than ever." And I'm seeing that in real time. And so you see these things as we adjust them, and people give back info, and it's not as good as a scientific study, but I tell you, it's very close.
Right.
And it's helped us progress in the data we've gotten from the families and their ability to tell each other, oh, this is how I get my child to do the enemas, or this is how I buy the enemas, or this is where I make the enemas. It's been a great experience for everybody, I think.
Well, and I think that that social norming is important because I do think that, especially with a treatment, look, if today you went on the Mayo Clinic website and you looked under bedwetting, constipation among potential causes is right down at the bottom, right? It's
Yeah.
they're recognizing it, but it's at the very end of their list. And so when you're doing something new, I think that most parents want to believe that they're doing the right thing. So the idea that they can tap into other parents and learn from them, I think is really powerful. I think that's great. So
Yeah.
you mentioned this in your book, but I don't know if you have any new thinking about this. Why are we seeing more constipation in kids? Why are kids being constipated? I guess is a better way to say it. What's going on there?
Yeah, I do think that most parents they want an answer why, right? Just like you said. Like, okay, my
Right.
kid has this horrible constipation. What in the world's going on? Was it something I fed them?
Yeah.
Was it something I did to them? Is it something, and in all my experience, because I've seen kids in my clinic that don't have great diets. They're just brought there by their parents. I've seen kids of parents that have sought me out right from across the globe, and so they have very with it involved parents that give them the cleanest diet, and that you wouldn't even think would be possible. So it's come down to a couple things. One is most likely, of course, the modern diet, but I'm talking like not even like this decade or this century.
Mm,
Just primitive humans ate a lot differently. Um, I often use the braces example. The way my mind works. My kids are starting to get braces. I'm like, why does everyone need braces? Like, what is up
right.
with that? Like, how can we all need braces? This God didn't make everyone with crooked teeth. And I looked it up, and it's because the diet is I guess primitive humans went from breast milk to, like, just, like, food, and
Right.
even in some primitive cultures, I think Papua New Guinea, where they do that still, their teeth are perfect, but the jaw doesn't grow because we don't have these foods. So I think, yeah, if you ate a caveman diet, the amount of fiber and raw fruits and vegetables, you probably poop normally. So
Right.
combine this new diet, which is not gonna be high in, fiber, and we're talking huge doses of fiber, right, that they were getting back then. Plus, the developed human brain, which overthinks this, I think, like it wouldn't occur to a bear or a dog to hold their poop in because they didn't want to go. It doesn't even
Mm,
occur to them. But a human's able to say, I don't like that feeling. If I squeeze my sphincter, it goes away. I'm not going to poop.
right.
Um, put them in clothes, give them an iPad, good luck. So I think it's multifactorial, But honestly, genetics and personality is what I've seen is the most. If I see a kid that's constipated, I kind of pick out the parent that looks like him. And I'm like, you were constipated as a kid, weren't you? They're like, yeah, I was. And so I think anal retentive is a real thing. I
Right.
don't know what the psychologist meant by that, but it's definitely real.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much for your research. I want to thank you for doing the research. I double checked some of your research just because I was so curious. I found it so odd that nobody was quoting O'Regan. And I found the same thing that you found, that very good studies in very good journals, nobody citing it. And it was baffling. So thank you for doing the work. I think that this is going to be very helpful for a lot of my listeners. And thank you for being a guest.
No, thank you for having me. I realized that there's a lot of information out there on bedwetting, and so it's hard to rise above the kind of noise in the crowd. And why should they believe anyone? I'm just saying that I think we have a good model for why it happens. Our model is predictive of what's going to happen, and is have a high cure rate. So I recommend, just start with an X-ray, check it out, and then if you're backed up, which I most likely will be, it's easy to fix. You'll save yourself a lot of time and trouble.
That was Steve Hodges. For more information about Steve and resources about toilet issues, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, learn more about me and my books, or suggest questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.